Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our Facebook Live Zoom session. Today, our presentation is going to be on financial considerations in uncertain times, and our presenter is Dr. Jennifer Hunter. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to her, and Jennifer, you're on. Don't forget to unmute your mic.
No, I was just working on sharing you right now. All right, hello and welcome to everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. We are streaming on both Zoom as well as Facebook Live, and I thank you for joining us in both platforms. As Mindy mentioned earlier, right before we got started, is that we have individuals that are monitoring the chats through both Zoom and Facebook Live. So Sally and Maria will be joining us periodically. The questions on Facebook Live do come in via text, and they have about a 20-second lag. So just be aware if you ask a question that it does take a little bit of time to catch up with the real-time presentation, and then an additional bit of time to also have the question sent via text. But we are monitoring both chat boxes. And as Mindy mentioned, that today we're going to discuss navigating financial uncertainty. And I wanted to start off talking a little bit about what are our expectations for today. That as we think about the current financial situation, or even as we think about just general events that have unfolded over the last 2 weeks, that there is a lot of uncertainty going on in the world around us. And mainly today, we're going to talk in generalities because honestly, the numbers are changing very rapidly. I worked on this presentation yesterday afternoon, and I included some data on unemployment statistics and that type thing, and it was already out of date just a few hours later. So we'll talk primarily in generalities, and also we're just going to cover a very base layer of knowledge today. I think that there's so much information out there right now that we're trying to consume, and it's coming at us from so many different directions that we just want to begin to unpackage and unfold that. Our goal today is to keep this at about 20 to 30 minutes because honestly, we know when talking about money and talking about the economy, and I could talk for hours, but if we get much over that 30-minute mark, that it becomes to be a lot to digest. So some things we won't really dive too deep in, but that's okay because we can come back in the future and offer a session that does take a deeper dive into specific topics that we're going to talk about today. So I would encourage you that while we're walking through today's program, if there is a topic that you would like to have more information on or that you wish we would cover in greater detail, put that in the chat box because again, Maria and Sally are monitoring that, and that's information that we can use as we prepare programming into the future. So there is no doubt that we have been on a roller coaster ride, and probably for many of us, we feel like that we have been, maybe kind of chugging up to the very top or the peak of that roller coaster hill, and then all of a sudden, very, very quickly, we hit the peak and we are going down at a high rate of speed, and it does feel like a wild ride. And if you just look at the stock market for the last few days, just this week alone and the end of last week, you will see, if you could actually see a graph of it, you will see that roller coaster ride. And I think that that's something as consumers right now that we kind of need to accept. We need to put our seatbelts on and recognize that we're going to continue to be on a pretty wild ride for a while. And so we need to kind of try and figure out how best to navigate that. And that's primarily what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started with what is it that we do know. We do know that leading up to this current situation, we have been in a historically long period of economic growth ever since we emerged from the Great Recession in 2009. So the economy has been growing at a steady pace. The stock market has been growing at a steady pace. Employment numbers have been high. So we have really and truly kind of just been chugging along, just going up that roller coaster hill. The market began to kind of start to decline in early to mid-February, and the stock market has declined approximately 35% since mid-February. Again, that number is going to fluctuate. We're right now looking at potentially 3 consecutive days of growth, so that could kind of come up a little bit, but we're sitting around that 35% number. But what we also know is that we've entered into a bear market. And I feel like that might be one of those terms that you are hearing a lot on the news, or you might be reading about on social media from financial experts. So I wanted to take just a few minutes and talk about what is a bear versus a bull market. And because again, I think that those are terms that are thrown out there a lot on the news. So if we think about a bull market, that is what we have been in. The economy is strong. Job projections are good, people are employed, unemployment rates are high, consumer spending is pretty strong, and in general, investors have a good feeling about industries and investing within the stock market. A bear market is going to be the opposite of that. So that's when the economy starts to recede and when stocks begin to decline. And so what is that kind of break of when do you say, oh, we're in a bear versus a bull market? So generally speaking, a bear market happens when prices have fallen 20% or more from recent highs. And so that has what has recently occurred. So we have just moved from that bull market into the bear market. So I think that this is kind of the big question on everybody's mind, right? Is how bad is all this going to get? So financially, from an economic perspective going on around us, how bad is all this going to get? And then also, how long will it last? And unfortunately, I think those are questions that probably no one has the answers to right now. Now, there's certainly economists out there that can forecast and predict and can use modeling to give some idea about what to expect. But really and truly, I think the answers to these two questions are somewhat unknown. So let's start with what is it that we do know? So we do know that the economy, it runs in a cycle, that the economy is going to grow, it is going to peak, it is going to begin to contract, and then it is going to hit a bottom or a trough, and then it is going to begin to grow again. So again, if you just think of maybe not the roller coaster that has the loop in it, but just a roller coaster that kind of has the hills that go up and down, that is exactly what our economy does. And we know, going back and looking at history, that the economy is going to run in a cyclical fashion. Now, what we do not know is how long a period of time it is between the highs and the lows. So between the peaks and the troughs and then the peak again is kind of what we do not know. Now, what economists can do is that they can look at certain economic measures and economic factors and make estimates about how long they think these periods of growth or periods of contraction may be. And so oftentimes what individuals can do is they can look at what are those factors that are causing a contraction in the economy, and then they can go back and look historically, and when they can see this is a similar type factor that caused a previous contraction, based on performance from that previous contraction, they can kind of extrapolate then what might happen the next time that comes around. Now, the kink in all this, though, right now is that the COVID-19 epidemic is new. We can't go back in history and look at what a worldwide pandemic, what the recovery is going to look like from that. Again, economists can look at certain other measures, but it's adding a lot of uncertainty to the prediction about how long this may last or how bad it may get. Other things that we do know is that consumer spending is a key driver of the economy, that it is really and truly what bolsters our economy up, and it is heavily dependent on dollars that consumers are spending. And then we also know that employment drives consumer spending, right? So that makes sense. When people have jobs and they're getting a paycheck, they then have money to go out and spend. So what we really want to look at now is say, okay, well, what's going to be the impact on employment? And again, the impact on employment is currently unknown. That estimates have shown that nearly 25% of employers plan to or have downsized. And if we think about that, that's been a fairly rapid downsizing of employment, or anticipated rapid downsizing of employment of what may come in the next week or few weeks. Typically, employment does just not drop off that quickly. That normally, as we're kind of going into a period of contraction and reduced consumer spending, employment will follow that and it will slow over time. But this is a very quick contraction in employment. We also know that last week, 3.3 million Americans applied for unemployment. That number is estimated to be higher this week, but those numbers are not known yet. If we look at unemployment rates, so the February unemployment rate was about at 3.5%. Which is a very low unemployment rate. Currently, the unemployment rate is projected to be at approximately 5.5%, and we know that that unemployment rate will continue to grow. Kind of a natural rate of unemployment for a healthy economy is between the 3.5 to 4.5%. So there is some natural rate of unemployment that's expected and actually keeps the economy functioning kind of at a healthy pace. Just to kind of give you some comparisons in terms of unemployment rates, if we go back to the Great Recession, so 2007 to 2009, we had about a 10% unemployment rate during that time. Now, there are estimates that I've seen that go all the way up to, I'm thinking that 40 million Americans, or 40 million could potentially lose their job by the end of April. I think that that's probably a high-end estimate, but so there's a wide range of estimates of where we are now to what potentially could happen. And a lot of that is going to determine about how the coronavirus is addressed. It's going to depend upon how employers respond, how healthcare responds, et cetera. So there's so much unknown currently about employment, but we do know that employment is important for consumer spending, and we know that consumer spending is important for a healthy economy. I think we also know right now too is that I'm certain you've heard on the news about a stimulus bill that's kind of working its way through, which we're looking at probably about a $2 trillion stimulus bill. And so the market has kind of done a little bit of a bounce this week, and it's doing that kind of based on this idea of the stimulus bill coming. And so more or less, what would that look like for an individual or for a family? And kind of what's been laid out is that the stimulus plan would be up to $1,200 per individual, or $2,400 for a married couple. And there would be an additional probably $500 per child. But then the big question is, will the stimulus bill truly help consumer spending? We're going to talk about that just a little bit later. So lots of people are saying, okay, so now what? We're on this roller coaster ride. We're kind of on that downhill slide, and lots of people are scared and in, financial shock and trying to absorb what all is going on around them. So often we talk about kind of this locus of control, especially when dealing with a type of financial shock. And what the locus of control is encouraging you to think about, okay, what in this scenario do I have control over? What do I have influence over? And what do I not have control over? So let's use job loss for an example. That as an individual, I do not have control over losing my job in this current environment. That is not something that I couldn't perform any better. I couldn't do anything different. That me losing my job is going to be a direct result of the economy. It is not necessarily going to be anything that I personally could change. So job loss would be what I'm not in control of. So the circle of influence is kind of, okay, I may have lost my job, but are there things that I could potentially do, or individuals that I could potentially reach out to that might improve my situation, or might improve the likelihood of me finding another position, or might improve the likelihood of me maybe picking up a temporary part-time position? Are there some steps that I could take using my circle of influence to help mitigate or kind of make those ends meet from that job loss that I've experienced? Now, the circle of control are those things that I, as an individual, can take control of and can manage during this time. And that is really and truly going to be the decisions that I make about my personal finance in result of losing this job or having this loss of income. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are some of those financial decisions that you could make. All right, so what is it that I do now? You know, how do we put the Band-Aid on it? How do we get our piggy bank back together? So first, I think it's important to acknowledge that people are currently grieving right now what was. And that's okay. That we do need to have some acceptance of what it is that we have lost. And I think often when we think about finances, that we don't really give ourselves a chance to grieve over that, because it might sound a little bit like a silly type of concept. But I know that there's things personally within my life that truly are petty or not a big deal in the big picture at all. They're just kind of personal things to our family. But it's okay for me to be sad about that. It really and truly is. And it's okay for my kids or my husband to be sad about it. But we don't need to dwell on it. We need to, recognize it, grieve it, accept it, and then figure out how to address the current situation. And then we think about building financial capability. So what is it that I can do to learn about my new financial situation and learn how to address my new financial situation? And I'm going to show you some of that on the next few slides. But we also want to develop and reassess financial goals. That my financial goals may need to be different now, especially my short-term financial goals, than what they were even a month or 2 months ago, because I'm dealing with a new financial situation. And then we also want to reassess our post-financial crisis risk tolerance. So one thing that we can do to prepare ourselves for the future is to look at how this current financial situation impacted us, and are there steps that we could take in the future to have us more well prepared. And I think that we saw quite a bit of this when we came out of the Great Recession in 2007 to 2009, is that was such a huge financial shock and we had such a strong economy for such an extended period of time before that there was a lot of risky financial behaviors that individuals had adapted. But kind of that post-recession time period, people really assessed that financial risk tolerance and made new financial plans going forward. Now, we've kind of hit that long period of financial growth again, so I think we have seen some people lax on that, but it's always a good opportunity to plan ahead for the future as well. So we're going to talk about experiencing a sudden financial shock and address it from both responding to a lost income, and then also talk a little bit about the stock market. So let's get started in responding to loss of income. So for a family or an individual that may have lost one job or two jobs and really and truly have kind of this sudden reduction in income, figuring out how to cope is very important. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about unemployment benefits or programming or resources that may be available due to a sudden loss of income. Again, that's one of those topics that could be a 30-minute to an hour presentation on its own. So if that's something that's of interest to folks, we can certainly come back and offer that again. We're just going to talk in generality, though, about how do you respond to this sudden loss of income that could have occurred from a job loss. And really what you want to do is you want to act quickly to reduce your spending. So when we were talking about earlier that it's okay to grieve the loss but not to dwell on it, that's really what we're focused on here. It's okay to be upset about losing your job, but we also want to make certain that we are responding quickly, because the quicker we respond and the quicker that we adapt, then the quicker we can start getting ourselves back onto a financial track. So kind of the steps are fairly easy, and we're going to look through a series of worksheets that Mindy will be able to share with you that you can print off and be able to do this for yourself. But we're going to talk about how do you identify your income, identifying your current expenses, comparing your income and expenses, and then also how is it that we scale back and cut back. So typically we do that, or we walk through this process through using a spending plan. One thing that we want to try and be mindful of during this time when we're experiencing a sudden loss of income is that we do not want to turn to credit. And that can be very tempting to kind of max out our credit cards or use our credit cards to kind of keep us going. But we want to try, again, to make our income and expenses match as closely as they possibly can and resist using credit as much as possible. So when we start looking at the steps to a spending plan, we want to identify all of our sources of income. And that could be from unemployment benefits. That could be if a spouse or a partner still has a separate paycheck that's coming in. That could be from child support payments. It could be Social Security income. Any form of income that your household has coming in, you want to write that down and know exactly how much it is that you are bringing in on a monthly basis. You also then want to list all of your expenses. And this is what I think is kind of hard for people, is getting a gauge on how much is it that I really have going out. Our big expenses people tend to know, and if I asked y'all right now, which I won't, but if I asked y'all right now of how much are your current expenses, you could tell me that how much your mortgage payment is or how much your rent payment is. You could tell me how much your car payment is. You could probably tell me within a pretty good guess of what your electric bill and water bill and cell phone bill is. But then you'll probably have kind of those flexible expenses too that you might not have as good a gauge on. So maybe what you spend on food or dollars at the grocery store or dollars eating out or gasoline. Those are kind of expenses that we don't tend to monitor as closely because we're probably not paying that bill once a month. It doesn't come to us as a notification in the mail or notification on email, or we don't get a little thing from our bank that says you have this bill due now. So we don't think about how much that truly adds up over time. So we want to list all of our actual expenses. And then we want to compare our income and our expenses and see how close our income is to covering those total expenses. And if our expenses exceeds our income, so if we have more expenses than we do income, which is quite possible if we've experienced a job loss, then we need to figure out how is it that we reduce those expenses to match the amount of money that we have coming in. So you have three options to be able to do that. You can increase your income, which I recognize is so much easier said than done. And honestly, in this current situation, I am not certain how realistic that may be for a large number of people. The other option might be to decrease your expenses. And this is probably going to be what the most realistic option is for people, because again, when we think about that circle of control, we can control a portion of our expenses. Some of our expenses are fixed, and we cannot quickly change those. So if we have a mortgage, our mortgage payment we probably cannot reduce, but there are other expenses that we can reduce. And if possible, you might be able to do some of both. That there have been some businesses that are trying to hire part-time help just to meet kind of current demand, because maybe they've had a ramp up in demand due to our current situation. So that might be an option to look at as well. But I think most people are going to be focused on decreasing your expenses. So this is the worksheet that I mentioned. It's a spending savings plan worksheet, and it actually walks through each of the steps that I just talked about. So you can go through and be able to fill it out to where you insert all of your income, and then you start looking at your expenses, and you start off with your regular expenses. And these are the expenses that I talked about that are fairly easy to identify: your house, your car, your insurance, your utilities, that type thing. And this just kind of breaks it down so that you can see it a little bit better. And then we get to the expenses that are controlled by you. And these are the categories that we are going to be looking at reducing the most. And I will say that due to our current situation, some of these expenses are going to naturally decrease on their own. That as more folks are staying at home or working remotely, that transportation expenses might decline substantially. Money spent on clothing, that should decline substantially. You might have to watch your online shopping, and I do recognize that online shopping is somewhat of a way to kind of take your mind away from things at times too. But several of these expenses that you can reduce just based on our current lifestyle situation. But what you want to be looking at is not only reducing them now, if you have experienced a sudden loss of income, that after this situation is over, it will take some time to kind of build back up to where you were financially beforehand. So you want to be looking towards the future as well, that when life goes back to normal, how is it that you are going to continue to control these expenses so that you can get yourself back up on more sound financial footing. And then we also talk about an occasional expense worksheet, and this is more to where we're looking well into the future. And these are kind of those expenses that happen every occasionally, and they are really and truly what budget busters are, that people can do really good on managing those monthly expenses and making that income and expenses match. But then the month comes along that the car insurance is due, or the holidays happen and there's gift buying, and then that's not been built into kind of that monthly budget or that monthly savings and spending plan. So this is a worksheet as you're looking towards the future that really kind of helps you plan out how much you need to be putting in on that savings and spending plan per month to address your occasional expenses. I also think it is important as we go through this process that we help our family members understand that often when parents or adults in the household, when they have financial problems, they try and shelter their children from that. And that's completely understandable because we always want our kiddos to feel safe. We want them to feel like mom or dad or loved one can take care of them, and we don't want them to worry. But it is important that we communicate with our children and with our other members of our family, if that's a spouse or a partner, significant other, that we communicate about our current financial situation. Now, with our children, we do not necessarily need to give them details in terms of dollars, that they don't need to know we lost a specific dollar amount of income with this job reduction. But what we do need to help them understand is that mom or dad or loved one might be cutting back on our expenses. So as a family, we need to be more mindful of our spending habits. And we have a publication that it's called The Bean Game. And I think it is great to do with children. And this can be done from fairly young children, kind of once they have a concept of that things cost money. So probably a first, second, third grader, all the way up through high school. And the object of the bean game is essentially that you give the child dried beans, pinto beans, whatever it may be. They have a set number that they start with that represents their monthly income. And then they go through and they buy certain items. So for example, with housing, if a child wanted to buy their own home, that would cost them 3 pinto beans. Communication, which I think is fairly easy for a child to understand, but if they wanted internet access, that would cost them 2 beans. And so they spend their monthly income in beans. But then the next part of the exercise is that we take a portion of those beans away and we explain to them, oh, your hours got cut at work, or you lost a job. So now we only have this many beans to spend. And you have them repeat the exercise to where they have to make new choices based on that reduction of income. I think it kind of helps children visualize and to begin to understand that we can still meet all of our needs, that we can still have a roof over our head, and we can still have food in our bellies, but we are going to have to change our spending habits to be able to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish and take care of each other. So now we're going to kind of shift from the idea of addressing a sudden loss of income through unemployment to addressing the stock market. And I said at the very beginning that we have been on this wild ride with the stock market for several weeks. And that can create a considerable amount of anxiety, because for a large number of us, our retirement investments are directly linked to the market. That and also just following those numbers is kind of a gauge to how the economy is doing in general, at least from a consumer perspective, that it just kind of gives people something to look at. And you know, if the market's doing well, they feel pretty good. And if the market's doing bad, it can create some anxiety. So I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about that today. And so how is it that you should respond to the market and the changes in the market? And I'll tell you all a little story that, so I have an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old at home. And a couple months ago, at dinner, I started to explain to our 8-year-old about the stock market, which I think is a fairly normal conversation that probably everybody has at home, right? About the stock market with their 8-year-old kids. My kids are, you know, blessed to have a mother that just geeks out about stuff like this. And so, right, so they get to have these conversations at dinner where I'm certain they'd be happy for us to be talking about someone else. So I started trying to explain to her about the stock market, how it works, about investments and different stocks and individual companies and what all that meant. And it took a little while for her to rack her brain around it, as it does most people. But she has gotten then really invested now in the stock market. Like, it's something that intrigues her. And I did this same thing with our 15-year-old when he was little. And, you know, he got it. We talked about it, but then he let it go. But our youngest one, she's kind of holding on to it. And so she has certain stocks that she decided when we were talking about it, I encouraged her to think about, you know, why don't you pick a stock and we'll monitor it and we can talk about why it might go up and why it might go down and that type thing. So she picked Disney because, you know, what little one doesn't love all things Disney? So she picked Disney. And this was fairly soon after the release of Disney Plus. And Disney was at a 52-week high. And so I explained to her, you know, you probably don't want to buy a stock at a 52-week high, all that. But, you know, she's like, let's learn about Disney. So she has been monitoring Disney. And Disney obviously has gone down dramatically because they've had to shut down the theme parks. And Disney started dropping rather quickly when they were shutting down the theme parks in China. So Disney's been going down, Disney's been going down. She gives me an update every day about Disney and what Disney's doing. Just in case anybody's wondering, Disney's been up a little bit. It was up $2.85 yesterday. And so last night I said, why is that? And she said, well, obviously because of Disney Plus, right? So she's putting all those connections together. But she said to me a couple times, she's like, I think we should ditch Disney. Like, we don't need Disney, you know, but, and I've tried to explain to her that now's not the time to make any decisions about the stock market. That really and truly what you want to do is wait. It's a roller coaster. It is going to ebb and flow. And so we just want to wait it out and kind of see what happens in the coming weeks, because we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction or a quick response to a sudden shock. So we want to give some time. We also want to try and calm emotions. That monitoring the stock market can create a tremendous amount of anxiety in people. So it's really probably not something that you want to look at on a daily basis. It's definitely not something that you want to look at on an hourly basis. It's okay to check in every once in a while, but it's not something that you want to spend a lot of time looking at, because the more time you spend looking at it, probably the more anxiety that it is going to incite within you. What we need to remember is that most of our investments within the market, sound financial strategy is that those are our long-term investments, that it's not dollars, or it should not be dollars that we need in the short term. So hopefully for individuals that were at or close to retirement, they were kind of observing those sound financial practices of moving their investments into more conservative investments, because they're going to need that money sooner than individuals that are further away from retirement. So we want to think about our investments within the market for the long term. And so this right now is something that we want to ride out and see what happens. Now, once we kind of had a little bit of time, what individuals may want to do is review their portfolio and review what we call our asset allocations. Are we diversified? So I've been teaching my little girl about the stock market with individual stocks. But honestly, that's not a sound financial strategy to encourage the investment in individual stocks. That, more likely if we were to look at investing in mutual funds, which is going to be a lot of companies put together, that there'll be some ebb and flow within that fund and some things to counterbalance. So there's probably not as chance of making as much, but there's also not a chance of losing as much. So looking at how it is that you're invested. This also right now will tell you a lot about your investment risk tolerance, that how much risk is it that you can kind of absorb as a person. And I often think about this is, can I still sleep at night? And that you don't want to be in such high risk investments that you're losing sleep over how the market is performing. So after we've had some time for everything to kind of settle down, if this is something that did create a lot of anxiety within you, you might want to review your portfolio, reevaluate your asset classifications, and look at if there's a better way to balance your portfolio moving forward. Okay, so I have done a tremendous amount of talking, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you all may have. I should have given this disclaimer at the beginning, but just as a reminder, we cannot, when we're talking about financial matters, we cannot answer specific financial questions that refer to your financial situation, but we can certainly answer questions in general.
Jennifer, this is Sally. There's lots of chat going on about the bean game, that it would be excellent to prepare those for the pickup packets that a lot of offices are doing, where they're sitting things outside their office for families to pick up. Then the comment was made that beans are sold out everywhere.
And you can use buttons, you can use pebbles, you could use marshmallows, anything just to kind of look like a currency, so that they understand. You could use pennies for that matter. So it doesn't necessarily have to be beans. That's typically the way I've utilized it is with pinto beans, but you could use absolutely anything that would just be a little bit of a marker, and kind of shows those kiddos some type of currency that they're spending.
There's been lots of suggestions, and even someone said you could just make your own little paper chips that families could cut out at home. It was also mentioned that the April Money Wise was talking to kids about money. So if you're looking for a publication to possibly put in with this, that might work. And then do you know of any other publications they might pull out to put in packets or could use?
I think for our extension agents, we can certainly send out a list of materials that can be distributed through our local county extension offices. For just the general public that might be watching along with us today, just provided a brief list of resources, that there are a large number of resources out there that are available. I would encourage anyone, though, that as you're looking at those resources, to please make certain that you vet the sources. And that's also going to be true if you're just reading general financial articles about just about the economy and what's going on, is to be certain that it comes from a legitimate source. So things typically, when we're thinking about from a financial perspective, that we look for .gov links or .edu links, but information that you know is coming from a true, tried and trusted source, to make certain that you're getting the best information.
It's also mentioned on here that if a family cannot make it to the extension office, that the bean game is something that will easily fit into an envelope and it can be mailed. So that's been a suggestion.
It can be, and I believe Mindy also has the online link that people could just go on and print it off at their house too, if they have access to a printer.
Yes, I did mention we will be sharing these in the chat box or in the comment box, or if you would like it emailed to you, you can send me an email at ukfcsext@uky.edu.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today, and appreciate all the comments and participation, and give a little promo that I know tomorrow we have another webinar coming up about working out from home, and it has kiddos included. And Mindy, I believe, if I am correct, that it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern time.
That is correct. It is 2 p.m. tomorrow at Eastern time. Okay, Jennifer, thank you so much for providing all this great information to our viewers this afternoon. And as you mentioned, all of these resources are available through their extension offices. So while you might not be able to go into the office physically right now, you certainly can contact them through email or through social media or through their website. So we hope that you will join us again. Thank you.
Thank you.